and welcome to our session today. Hopefully you've managed to fill in the opening poll, and we're just going to start with the session straight away. So thank you, Anna-Marie. So tonight's session is looking at the targeted preparation for adulthood offer. We're delighted to have Barry with us again, and we've also got the whole team from Lancashire and West Yorkshire here tonight who'll be contributing to the session. Next slide, please. Quick reminder of our contract aims for Whole School Send. We are here to support the workforce in better understanding their responsibilities for SEND. We're here to help schools and also local authorities to actually sort of meet training needs and trying to build capacity so that people can contribute to excellent SEND provision. So we're very committed to these sort of aims, and we're hoping that this evening's session will help support them. Next slide, please. As I've mentioned already, there's three of us who are part of the Lancashire and West Yorkshire team, and then we also have Barry, who is an independent consultant with many years of experience in sort of local authorities in leadership, and he's joining us to support us with part of the session as well. So next slide, please. Our session objectives for tonight are to build on the work that we did last time when we were looking at the universal PFA offer, and actually sort of start to look at that at a targeted level. So what we will be doing for young people that might be additional to and different from what we're doing as part of our universal offer. We're going to provide some sector examples, and we're also going to have a look at the audit tool along with a specific piece of work that Barry's going to lead for us around What Matters Island, which will help you to sort of identify young people's needs. Next slide, please. So we can just start with a very quick recap of what we did last time. We started off with a little session, a starter activity that Barry provided for us, which was about a good life and what a good life meant to us as teenagers, to help us to remind ourselves. We went through sort of the four themes of PFA: employment, good health, independent living, friendships, relationships, and community. We explored a number of statistics and looked at some labour market information, and we used this really to see why preparation for adulthood is so important. And although it tends to be something that we only think about for learners with SEND, what we were trying to stress in our first session was preparation for adulthood is essential for everybody, not just for learners with SEND, across the 0 to 25 age range. We did identify that some of the data that we looked at really raised some concerns in terms of how effective we are at preparing young people for adulthood. And Nicole gave quite a detailed understanding of the disability perception gap and how this can impact on young people's sort of understanding of themselves if they've got disabilities, but also how, you know, the sort of hidden messaging we're giving to other young people who maybe don't have disabilities and don't understand disability particularly well. We spent some time looking at young people and their responses to various surveys and questionnaires to find out how we could make a better designed PFA offer. And we also looked at the fact that there are three levels of offer that we would expect all schools to have in place: the universal, the targeted, and the specialist. So as I said before, last session was very focused around the universal offer, and tonight's session is moving into that targeted space. The final session that is coming up in a couple of weeks' time will focus on the specialist PFA offer and what we do to sort of specialise the offer for young people who have more complex needs. We talked about sort of the reflections that participants could make about their own settings, and we did have some contributions in the chat, so thank you for that. We are hoping that you feel you can contribute again tonight. So if you've got thoughts and you'd like to share them, then we'll be monitoring what's happening in the chat, and we'll be sharing any points you put forward. So please do let us know anything that you want to. And then in the gap task, we asked you to have a think about your universal PFA offer. and to actually look at the Preparation for Adulthood review guide and the PFA website to sort of deepen your understanding of what we mean when we're talking about preparation for adulthood. Next slide, please. Next slide. So just to remind people, because I think we've got some people with us tonight who maybe didn't manage to make it to the last session, that we are sort of thinking about provision in these three sort of bands of offer: universal for everybody, targeted provision, the additional to and different from that we provide for young people with SEND support needs, and then our specialist provision offer that may happen in specialist settings, but also happens in mainstream for learners who typically will have an education health care plan that outlines their needs and the provision that needs to be made to support them. Next slide, please. And I think I'm going to pass over to Nicole now to give us a bit more detail on these slides.
Yeah, so when we're talking about the targeted offer, what we're really talking about is a layer of additional enhanced provision, and in some cases a different and alternative that sits on top of the universal offer. So not something that replaces it but enhances and adds to it, but also that interacts with that universal offer. So ensuring that teachers in the classroom know what the children receiving additional and different are doing when they're out of the classroom, and how that supports them when they're back, when they return to the classroom, and also making sure that information about the successes and challenges of what they're experiencing in the universal offer are being responded to in the targeted provision. Are they being supported to multitask? Are they being supported to learn how to sit and concentrate for a longer period of time? So this is not something that replaces, and nor is it something that is entirely separate to, but an enhancement and building on the universal offer that all students are getting. When we're talking about the targeted offer, we're really talking about the children that are on your SEN register but don't have an EHCP, even though the specialist layer adds to that again, so this would include the children with EHCPs as well in many cases. So we're talking about a minority within our schools, but a significant minority. And on here it says that it's around 12.2%, that's an average. Depending on the school, it could be much, much higher. I know in my own school it's coming up much closer to 1 in 5. So we're talking about quite an extensive range of additional and different provision that affects a large number of children. Next slide, please. So this is an image that I developed and that we use to just show that same information really, but from a different way of looking at it, or a different way of thinking about it, and to remind us that that universal offer, that the universal and targeted offer is not a static entity or a static relationship. So whether we're talking about preparation for adulthood or any other aspect of our main or enhanced provision for our children, that provision, including the universal offer, should be responsive to the needs that we have in the building at that time. So it should evolve and change with each new cohort of children, or as their needs develop and as they grow as people. In addition to that, it should be and needs to be interactive and collaborative with other areas of need, particularly behaviour and safeguarding. And when we're thinking as the children get older and they develop their independence, considering the social and safety aspects of the offer that we have for them is absolutely crucial. And to me, most importantly, it is something that is constantly expanding and improving. So the definition of inclusion in the Code of Practice is that it's the progressive removal of barriers to participation in education and experience. So no one thing that any school is doing is the answer or is the way of doing it. You're only really inclusive if you're constantly expanding your universal offer, building on the quality and quantity of what you can just offer as the norm, so more and more children can be included as just part of the main of what you do. And that has the knock-on effect of enabling you to make sure that your targeted provision is really, really bespoke, really, really responsive and high quality, equitable with the experience that children without SEND are getting. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we spoke about in more detail last time was the disability perception gap, which is a piece of research that's done by Scope. If you haven't had chance already, I would really encourage you to go have a look at that. It's fascinating, a little depressing, but I think really important that all practitioners working in education are aware of the problems and the potential impact that we can have. So what that study particularly looks at is attitudes towards disability amongst the non-disabled adult population. It's highlighted misconceptions and inaccuracies in people's perception of disability, particularly that most people significantly underestimate the prevalence of disability in society, and also massively misconstrue the wants and needs of people with disabilities, usually by assuming that it's very different to their own, when the reality is that that's not the case. We all pretty much need the same things. And the disability perception gap particularly relates to and links into another piece of research around the disability employment gap, and the two pieces of research really can't be separated out from each other. I think what's particularly important for this sequence of sessions, and particularly when we're looking at the targeted offer, is the piece of research within that disability perception gap report about how attitudes towards disability are impacted by proximity to disability. And they've found quite a stark, the negativity towards disability increases quite starkly amongst people who do not know anyone with a disability. Or if you turn it around, if it's easier to imagine it the other way, the closer you are to someone with a disability, the better your understanding and the more positive you feel about disability and the contribution they can make in society. So we spoke about this at length last time in the previous session, because really for us in schools, that means that whenever we provide opportunities for our children, SEND and non-SEND, to thrive and succeed and learn together, we're combating the disability perception gap. We're enabling our children that don't have disabilities and don't have additional needs to learn firsthand that we all benefit from a diverse community, that we can succeed alongside one another, and that people with disabilities are just like them. They want to do well, they want to have friends, they want to go on to be happy and successful in their adulthoods. So that's an important piece of work that is perhaps in our blind spot as teachers and educators. And if you just go to the next slide. We did also talk about this idea of the hidden curriculum. So we have our lesson plans and schemes of work and the specs and the things that we're working on that we know that our children need to learn. And we also, in most cases, explicitly teach things like PSHE and how we expect them to behave and how to have good manners. The hidden curriculum is really something that sits behind that, and again is often in our blind spot, that the children are constantly learning from how we interact with each other, how we speak to them, how we speak about other children in front of them, how we speak about the community and the families. Everything that we do and say, right down to the tone of our voice and our body language, is teaching them how to replicate that and how to behave towards those same issues and everyday experiences. And I think it's this part of it that is particularly pertinent to the targeted offer, because once we start to get into providing additional and different for our children, we're talking about taking some children out of the main of what we do. if they have specific needs, if that's what's right for them, then that is absolutely the right thing to do, and ensuring that that's high quality and pertinent is really important. But what is also important is how we describe those things, how we react towards them, how we talk about them. There is a big difference between saying this child's being taken out of our lesson because they can't access it, and saying this child is going to do something that's really important for them. Just subtle differences in messaging and how we describe things and how we react to things, or saying things like, oh God, so and so's not in here again, is very different to responding positively to every child getting what they need and describing it in that way. So all of the things that we said last time, I'm not going to go over the whole thing again, but I would encourage you to go look at that and think about it in terms of PFA, but also the targeted offer in general, but particularly thinking about how our choices around how we describe that and how we organise the additional and different might be informing children's opinions about disability and their understanding of diversity. Next slide.
Have the next slide, please. So we've mentioned before about the 4 broad areas of need. And when we start to look at our targeted offer, often it's useful to think about a targeted offer that covers the 4 broad areas of need. So because young people sort of are real, they're not sort of imaginary, and they don't fit nicely into these boxes. What we often find is when we start to unpick the needs of an individual, they often have multiple and overlapping needs. So, it isn't, unfortunately, a nice little exercise where you can pigeonhole children into boxes. It's basically, who is this child in front of me? How do I support them? Which needs, which of the 4 broad areas of need are they sort of affected by? And how do I make sure that I reduce those barriers to their participation? And, sort of with sensory and physical needs, often it's very practical things that young people need. It's about adaptive sort of equipment. It's about sort of making things more physically accessible for them, about reducing sort of the impact of a sensory impairment by reducing sort of noise, or sort of reducing the sort of, increasing the contrast in an environment to improve visual acuity. So, sort of actually thinking about those needs. Whereas for social and emotional needs, often it's about young people feeling great about themselves and about giving them confidence to actually try new things. So in terms of preparing them for adulthood, it's giving them that capacity to self-regulate and feel confident. And then if we think about cognition and learning needs, quite often these are young people who, if it's a moderate learning difficulty or a severe or profound learning difficulty, these are young people who are sort of operating at a level which is sort of delayed when compared to peers. Whereas if we think about young people who have more specific cognition and learning difficulties, usually it's a barrier that may be to do with their reading, or maybe to do with their writing skills or their math skills, which is meaning that they're struggling to access part of the curriculum. And we need to sort of find out what it is that helps them as an individual. And with communication and interaction needs, it's often about making sure our use of language is appropriate to ensure that young people understand what it is we're saying, what it is we want them to do, and how we move them forward, and give them that good support. And for young people on the autistic spectrum, very much about understanding their particular interests and areas of skill, and using those to help them to find sort of useful and meaningful things that they can do both now and in the future. But in all cases, for me, as an experienced specialist coming from mainstream and special schools, it's about young people feeling good about themselves. And I think when we reflect back on what we sort of found about the universal offer, and we talked about how we felt as teenagers last time with Barry, we talked about having friends, we talked about sort of having aspirations, having sort of the opportunity to achieve and do well. And so, in terms of our targeted offer, it's exactly the same. It's just making sure that every young person has that opportunity. Next slide, please. Just in terms of sort of how needs sort of pans out across the sort of schools in England, this is for primary and secondary schools, and it's mainstream data, and you can see the breakdown. And we often talk about there being a sort of big five in terms of need, and these are specific learning difficulties, moderate learning difficulties, social, emotional, mental health needs, speech language communication needs, and autistic spectrum disorders. Or conditions, depending on which language you use. The language we're using here is the DFE language. So, actually all schools, all mainstream schools need to be thinking about their offer around those sort of big five areas of need. But then because children are individuals, there also needs to be an offer there for children with low incidence needs. So that's children maybe who have got visual impairments or hearing impairments or other types of need. Next slide, please. So we just remind ourselves of our four areas for PFA. We had employment, good health, independent living, and friends, relationships, and community. And we're just going to sort of have a little look at how that might look from a curriculum point of view. So we're looking out for, sort of people contributing in the chat, so please don't be shy. There's no such thing as a wrong answer. What we're hoping to do is share some ideas, and if you can add to that ideas bank, everybody goes away richer. So it would be really helpful if you do feel you can contribute. Next slide, please. So we're thinking about our youngest children, and I've just taken this quote from the Code of Practice that that young people basically, at the very earliest stages, we need to actually sort of give an understanding that the future is bright. And I think often for families who have a child who has got additional needs, it can be a very difficult time for them in recognising that maybe the young person they thought they were going to have isn't the child they've got. And families need a lot of support to actually sort of recognise there are all sorts of positives about their individual child, and sort of actually sort of having some role models, having some information about young people who have sort of gone on in life and achieved really well can really help families to have that belief that their child can be really successful, and a learning difficulty isn't some kind of horrendous sort of sentence that they're going to have to live with. It can be quite positive for families to have really positive interactions with specialists at the very beginning. So one of the things we need to do is to actually think about how stereotyped we are in the resources we use. So thinking in the early years settings, how many pictures are there of young people enjoying themselves who evidently do have learning difficulties? And this feeds into the disability perception gap that Nicole was talking about earlier. It's really important that we choose books, we have resources in role play that actually encourage children to think about disability. And it's quite healthy for young people to see those things, not just for children who have a disability themselves, but for all children to see those things. Actually sort of talking about higher education for pupils with SEND and thinking about that from the tiniest sort of age, when you go to university, not if. So actually sort of putting it out there as a thought that it might be something for you, not that it won't be for you because you've got a disability. And then some of the sort of opportunities to be in situ in terms of intervention. So to make sure that children aren't constantly withdrawn from areas to receive speech and language therapy support. They can actually have that support in situ and be sort of playing alongside their peers as they're having that support, which is again really useful for them and for their peers. And things like introducing something like Makaton Sign Language or Sign Along as a way of everybody communicating within the setting and communicating together, which is actually supportive of the learners who do need something additional to and different from, but won't do any harm for any other children, and will give them a multimodal communication experience, which can be really helpful. If we start to think about good health in the early years, it's often about that well-being and emotional literacy. So actually making sure that young people have the right support, and some of those supports from speech and language around actually understanding emotion and being able to sort of recognise emotion in themselves and others. And that can be done through stories, it can be done through activities, and can be sort of strengthened for those children who need something that's additional to and different from, but again, it's part of the universal offer of what we're doing with all children. And when it comes to physical exercise and mobility, making sure that the equipment's in place to fully adapt the learning environment, both inside and out, so all children can have a go at all activities and no child gets left behind. So important both to mental health, but also to physical health. And for young people who have a physical disability, giving them lots of opportunities to develop those core muscle skills and sitting up and being able to take part alongside their peers. If we think about independent living, it's often about sort of starting young and giving children the opportunity to make choices. But then for some children, particularly children on the autistic spectrum, too much choice can actually be overwhelming. So reducing choice down to an array, but not taking choice away, because it's really important that we help young people to start to think about the choices they make as early as possible. And then encouraging young people to be independent in their personal care. So making things adaptive, having bigger buttons so that children can actually sort of learn to do those for themselves, and actually helping sort of young people to get that sense of success that children feel when they have done it for themselves. It's so important for learners who are in that sense support arena and need a little bit more, but they don't need everything doing for them. And if we start with that in the early years, then our hope would be by the time they're moving into primary school and into secondary school, they will believe that they can be independent. And a lot of it is about their belief in themselves, and that's so important. And then in terms of friends, relationships and community, establishing really solid rules and routines. Everybody likes routine. I love my routine. I get really upset when people spoil it and it gets changed. Children really love it. And so having a physical timetable which can support those learners who do need the structure of a timetable and knowing what's coming next. All learners can see that, and it can be done as a class activity. So it doesn't need to be something that feels like it's additional to and different from, but it is there for those children who absolutely need it. And then sort of developing relationships. As a trust, we're very strong on our therapy pets. We love them. And we feel that they really help that children who maybe struggle to communicate with adults or communicate with other children to actually sort of build up that unconditional trust and that relationship with an animal. And then finally, to make sure that we differentiate and adapt our teaching to ensure that we can really hit the sort of support that young people need around building those friendships and relationships. So intervening and actually giving the support at the moment when things are starting to go wrong, rather than stepping back and allowing things to go wrong and then trying to pick up the pieces. And that might be all the additional to and different from some children need. So it's really important to sort of move towards the targeted offer from your universal offer, rather than start from a point of view of let's just do lots of things which are very, very different to what we were doing for the most of the children in the group. Next slide, please. So if we start to think about primary school, and again, just to remind you of some of the information we shared last time, that we said that by the age of 6, some children have already sort of got some quite clear stereotypes. And by the time they reach 9, they're starting to abandon their fantasy careers. And I think that's really sad. I think we should give children the opportunity to actually sort of live with fantasy for a lot longer, because fantasy is what makes life fun. So the more we can do in our primary to encourage children to dream big, I think is so important. So if we start to think about the targeted offer, it is about making sure that the key skills are there. So these are the things that will support young people with employment. So literacy, numeracy and ICT are so important as part of the SEND support offer, and catching children up wherever possible. So where children have fallen behind their peers, is there an opportunity to put in a really high quality, evidence-focused, targeted intervention which can help those children catch up. And again, in terms of role models, actually sort of making sure that adults in the school represent people with disabilities. So whether they're staff who are employed as part of the staff team, or they're people who come in as part of work experience, can be really important for young people to see people like them who are actually successful adults making a difference. If we think about good health, a lot of our health education obviously comes through PSHE, and, you know, sort of having visuals to help young people, particularly with emotions, helping them to understand how they feel in different situations, how characters feel when you're doing your literacy work, can be really, really important. And again, when we look at PE, looking at the adaptive equipment and bringing in physio and OTs to support you in the design of your PE curriculum to make it as inclusive as possible and make that targeted, additional to and different from, as subtle as you possibly can, so young people aren't made to feel too different, because what young people will often tell us is they don't want to feel different, they want to feel the same as everybody else. And the more we can sort of provide that for them, the better we can make them feel in terms of their mental health as well. Obviously, you know, many schools now have got mental health first aiders who have got a lot of expertise, and actually making sure that the SEND team and the mental health first aiders work together to co-design approaches which really support our young people is so important. And when we sort of start to move into things like food technology, and this sort of overlaps between good health and independence, it's providing structures so young people can actually learn to cook a meal and do that independently. So maybe having the symbol recipe, maybe having sort of photographs and using those around the room. And yes, they're there for one child who maybe needs that support, but nobody will be harmed by having photographs of what's in particular cupboards. And sometimes in primary school classrooms, when it's very busy, it can be difficult for children who are neurotypical to find the resources they need. So photographs on the doors can really help. If we move into independence, actually mastering skills and allowing sort of young people to learn the skills they will need for later life. It's never wasted time to teach children how to tie their shoelaces. You know, it's really important as a life skill. So making sure that alongside all of the wonderful work we're doing with children for their curriculum, that we also provide really good quality support around the life skills they're going to need, personal hygiene and their care, and also, you know, really sort of supporting them with numeracy skills so that they can actually start to understand early budgeting and managing money. And then if we move into friends, relationships and community, allowing young people to sort of have that sense of citizenship, making sure that you have representatives on pupil council who are children who are on SEND support, and you have children who have education healthcare plans representing, you know, the needs of their community, to sort of give them that sense of ownership and the opportunity to influence and change. And this is so important to prepare them for later life and actually sort of being advocates for themselves and for others. Relationships education, really important to look at social use of language, to look at sort of really high quality social stories. If you are going to use social stories with young people, make sure they really are social stories and they're not just bossy books. You know, that Carol Gray's work is amazing, and, you know, there is an absolute code to writing a social story. So rather than think you've written one, make sure that you've actually referred to the sort of Writing Social Stories book, which tells you exactly how to do that really well. And then also encouraging children and young people to do charity work. And one of the things that they can do is actually raise funds for a charity that actually represents themselves. So actually understanding their own disabilities. And this is something that, you know, I often find when I go into secondary schools that young people don't know enough about their own disability. And the more we can do to support them, and the more we can do to help them to understand what they need, so that they can hold the adults around them to account and make sure they get the provision they need. Doing that in the primary school is so important because it prepares them for the next stage in their education. So if you've got brilliant ideas around sort of the targeted offer, early years or primary, please do put something in the chat and let us know what it is you're doing and your good ideas that you'd like to share. Next slide, please. I think it's Helen.
Hi, I'm Helen Howe, and I'm going to speak to you kind of a bit now about PFA. It's secondary and FE. Now, when I was growing up, I'm going to show my age now, there was a children's program called Johnny Briggs, where one of the characters constantly said, before anything that they said, my mum who's a nurse. So I will know if anybody kind of comments in the chat that they're of my same age. I'm just saying this because I am going to do something similar, and I apologise in advance. I'm not going to tell you my mum's a nurse, but I'm constantly going to tell you that I am a Senko and in my setting. So this is what I will say a lot. I apologise in advance. But looking at PFA, looking at how that kind of transfers to kind of secondary school, I think what we need to make sure that there are certain things that underpin it. And first of all and foremost, that would be person-centered planning. Now, this is always at the forefront at any stage, but I think this can almost come to life once we get to secondary and FE, because our young people are at that stage in their life now where they also want to explore their independence and their life choices. So giving our children kind of on sense support stage, on an EHCP, a voice in their future and a voice in their planning, it naturally fits into our review of our kind of sense support plans and of our EHCP reviews. And it's that kind of natural progression into FE, and the children have a voice there. Obviously, another part that needs to underpin this is the involvement of carers and parents. I think kind of in the previous session that we did, talking about your own kind of experiences of childhood and your desires kind of as a teenager, etc. Okay, a lot of them possibly wouldn't have centered around exams, and it's very interesting. We always talk to our parents and carers what their aspirations and dreams are for their children, and it is always PFA centered. You know, parents and carers always want, okay, their core desires for their children to be heavily PFA centered, for them to be a part of the community, for them to have employment, etc. So really important to have that kind of cohesive body together, with the child talking about their future, with the parents and carers involved, and again feeding that into the process of the review process for your sense support plans and your EHCP plans. Working towards positive outcomes, again, positive outcomes, and I'll talk about this in just a moment, at secondary and FE, okay, we can look more into kind of life experiences, where our young people and where we can, more importantly, can help them, okay, in gaining their independence in these areas of their life, and target setting for them kind of in these areas. And obviously that early assessment and transition planning from moving on to it, be it to college, and be it to FE, helping them have that good careers advice, good planning, okay, excellent knowledge about what is available to them, giving them all of the tools for them also to independently help themselves and move to that next phase. Okay, if we can go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so certain ways that we could do that. If we're going to look at building independence, okay, and looking at kind of community, building into the community, one way to actually do that is looking at person-centered curriculums. Not all of our children get everything they need, okay, from the universal curriculum. Now, I'm sure we kind of talked about in the last session about how kind of particularly at secondary, there are a lot through the general kind of subjects available. A lot of PFA is delivered through your PHSE, your RE, your food technology. So there is in that universal offer. But again, still some of our kind of sense support learners and EHCP learners need a more targeted approach. So there are lots of ways that this can be done. If we actually look at some of the alternative qualifications, if some of our learners cannot access the GCSE curriculum, a lot of the entry level and functional skills qualifications actually have inbuilt PFA into them. And it is really, really good advice to talk to your local specialist setting. So, okay, here it comes in my setting, because I am a Senko. Okay, I spoke to my local kind of specialist setting, who gave me wonderful advice, absolutely wonderful advice about what English and maths qualifications would be good for my learners. Now, they in particular, you know, recommended to me the Open Awards. There's lots of other kind of awards. But in particular, what you have to remember is with your English and your maths kind of entry level and functional skills, built into them, okay, is the PFA. So for example, with your English, there are tasks that are writing emails to employers, okay, writing letters to make complaints, all those kind of general kind of life skills that you would need, okay, is built into actually to the examination series. Very similar to the maths, okay, the life skills that are built in there is very much centered around money and budgeting, etc. So all of those are kind of naturally built in to some of those qualifications. Other qualifications as well, if we are looking at a person-centered curriculum, that will need to look at a learner and look at some of the other skills that they need to develop. Okay, so in particular, the ASDAN qualifications. ASDAN offer a fabulous suite of qualifications as alternatives. These are vocational qualifications and are very, very good at building kind of life skills for pupils. So there's one in particular I've kind of referenced there, which is called My Independence, that ASDAN actually runs. And again, it's about kind of the young person building and working through modules, okay, about how to prepare them kind of for adulthood. But there's also kind of general modules that they actually run as well, that are level 2 modules that again I run in my setting, that also have inbuilt PFA. And they are qualifications that the learners work through kind of at their own speed, but include things such as vocational learning, learning how to write a CV, visiting colleges, looking at jobs and looking at the qualifications kind of needed, also looking how to improve your health, looking how to set up an enterprise and sell something that you've made. Really interesting to lots of learners, but also ticking all of those boxes kind of PFA. In the other aspect, obviously, kind of the merging into the community is looking at the social friendships and looking at, okay, would be more your SALT interventions and your social communication groups. Okay, these will help our learners, okay, you know, build up on their friendships and their ability to kind of manage relationships, if you like, in the future. I've referenced kind of one particular SALT intervention there by Michelle Garcia Williams. That's a really nice one to look at because what it actually deals with is unexpected situations. The language used in it is very good at getting learners to understand. There's a lot of talk about thinking with your eyes, talking about learners to kind of look at the situation and take perspectives. That's a nice kind of intervention to look at. Other interventions that kind of build in PFA, if you do talk about teenagers, etc., that tends to start out from a very personal perspective. When you talk about the learner kind of talking about themselves and recognizing themselves and their emotions and how to regulate them, to actually then building up to how to problem solve, how to resolve an argument, how to resolve a difference with somebody, which are actually very, very key core life skills that a lot of our children will actually need. So there are ways when a targeted, if we're looking at a personal curriculum, that we can build in those skills of, you know, being able to kind of integrate into the community and to build independence also. Next slide, please. From a health and community aspect, I've put on here again in my setting, okay, here is one of my pupil profiles talking about very easy ways to kind of access and to build in targets for children to look at these areas. I think Angela said earlier, you'd be amazed at the amount of children who don't really have a good understanding of their health needs, who, you know, are not really kind of up to date kind of with how to manage that. So when you have kind of pupil profiles, etc., okay, it's very easy kind of to build in some PFA targets. So again, you can have a look. You probably don't even think that you are building in kind of PFA targets, but giving the child a target to arrive to lesson on time. You know, we all know how difficult some children find it to navigate those big kind of secondary FE buildings. That is actually working towards employment because you're actually, you know, allowing them to kind of time keep, etc. Helping them kind of navigate a timetable. Again, you know, independence, kind of working towards those things. So they're ways that they can easily be built in to small targets actually for them. From a personal and hygiene perspective, again, in my setting, sorry, okay, I have some learners who kind of have some toileting difficulties or may suffer anxiety going to the toilet by themselves. There again, you know, as a target for them that you're working towards, those small settings, okay, can, you know, whoever the assistant is who takes them, kind of wait outside the toilet while they go into the toilet, okay, using these small targets to help them and take ownership kind of some of their difficulties. And again, in particular with health, I think it's very important that we kind of give the young people the independence and the knowledge to kind of manage their health conditions. Okay, we talked about using kind of previously about using technology and having kind of apps available kind of for them to be able to register and show some of their difficulties that they have. You know, and all technology really kind of being utilised where it can be. Which then leads me on to, sorry, if you go on to the next slide, please. Okay, looking obviously in helping kind of our young learners then with their careers and their future. So those transition stages where they will move either to college or to FE or into the world of work. There are some fantastic tools available for schools and FE to use. So in particular, there's links kind of on these PowerPoints and that you can kind of access them at the end here. The National Careers and Enterprise Company, pardon me, is a fantastic website. Not only does it have all the Gatsby benchmarks kind of down the side of it, there is lots and lots of excellent resources and excellent reading, okay, about careers and SEND. So there's a kind of an autistic toolkit as well to kind of help some autistic learners. But I really would recommend kind of visiting that site and having a little look kind of at that site, and also kind of signposting it to your learners. The NDTI website is also absolutely excellent. Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. What they do have is vocational profiles. Now, there's a very, very long one. I'm not going to go into detail because I'm hoping Barry will in just a moment talk about these. Okay, but there's also a very short one-page vocational profile, which I think is just absolutely amazing and can be used kind of, you know, from any age, I would say, moving up through secondary into FE, allowing the learners to start to think about, okay, what is important to them, what career path that they're thinking of moving towards, and then obviously kind of expanding that kind of as, pardon me, as they grow up. Okay, on to the next slide, please. And again, this is taken kind of straight from the NDTI website, kind of signposting there, some fantastic, you can just see the links at the bottom, resources linked to all of these different stages. And again, I would just thoroughly recommend going onto that, kind of having a play about with it and visiting kind of some of those resources. So that brings me on to then finally, the final screen, please. Is also then onto the NDTA website is the PFA self-evaluation tool. Again, if you click on the link provided there, it takes you kind of directly to it. And there is a number of excellent tools to look at. So you can kind of evaluate yourselves kind of where you are, but also there's other things, kind of other valuable tools there. So you've got a post-16 checklist of things that, you know, obviously your provision can be doing. You've also got kind of SEND code of practice must-dos, things that obviously we must be kind of putting into place kind of in our settings. Just a very, very kind of and very user-friendly guidance for schools to do and FE settings. So I would thoroughly recommend to go and have a look at those sites there. So that leads us on to then, so obviously, and very luckily, we have Barry Jones from the NDTI to come on and talk for us next. And I'm hoping he will kind of, you know, recap and talk to you about some of these tools, because again, they are, you know, as a practitioner, Very, very useful, and make you kind of reevaluate kind of some of the things that you kind of put in there kind of in school. So Barry is going to come on in just a second. He is going to talk to us, okay, about the person-centered approach, and he's going to do a little exercise with us at the What Matters Island, and hopefully really kind of sell the fantastic work that the NDTI do. So Barry, I'm going to hand over to you now.
Thank you. And maybe you could give me a wave. Could you see a screen with my first slide on? Yeah, fabulous. Thank you very much. So I will be talking about some tools, not the ones that have been mentioned, and I'm happy to answer any questions at the end about the ones that have been mentioned. So I wanted to sort of talk to you about person-centered planning and sharing with you some tools that can really help us have good conversations with children and young people. So it's an invitation for us to move away from taking a medical model approach, which is about focusing on what's the matter. So moving away from taking a medical approach, just focused on what's the matter, to focusing on what matters. Yeah, just starting from a different place. What really matters to this child and young person? And when we think about preparing for adulthood, thinking about what does a great life look like now and in the future? And that's our invitation, to start from that point, find out that information, and then understand what the child and young person can do, their family can do, their friends and community, and finally, what support they might need from adults who are paid or unpaid to be in their lives, such as amazing education providers. So really taking a different kind of approach. I really like the work of Nancy Klein. So Nancy Klein talks about listening is a radical act. And I really like this kind of idea. So how do we create an environment where we demonstrate to children and young people, hey, you matter. And not only do you matter, your aspirations matter, and the wider team around you matter. And we want to find out what excites and motivates you. And we want to use that information to ensure that we've got the best plans that we can have around SEN support. And later, if needed, through education, health and care plans. And I just love this idea of what we do depends on the quality of our thinking. And our quality of our thinking depends upon the attention that other people give us. So when we're having these good conversations with children, young people and family members and speech and language therapists and physios and psychologists and social workers, the list is endless. How are we supporting this real good, effective listening space? How are we supporting and enabling that? How are we doing that? So it's an invitation for us to think about how we're showing up and being when we're having good conversations with people. So there's loads of super resources. I would say that, wouldn't I? Because I'm a really proud associate of NDTI, and they helped me pay some of my mortgage, thankfully. And nevertheless, when I wasn't an associate for NDTI, I used to be one of the go-to places. They're fabulous resources. They've got a resource called Preparing for Adulthood Year 9 Annual Review Guide. If I could, I would scratch the word Year 9 off here. I know in terms of the code of practice, all annual reviews must, legal duty, must, it's the law, be focused on preparing for adulthood at the very latest. So if I could, I would say, actually, you know what? This is a good guide for good conversations about annual reviews for all young people. This guide's been built by working with 18 different local authorities across the country. And as you can see there on the slide, it actually says, look, the code of practice says being supported towards greater independence and employability can be life transforming for children and young people. So when I hear the word life transforming, that's about saying they can have a slice of the action like we can. As Dr. Mark Gold would say, they can lead a good life now and in the future. And absolutely, it's up to us, whether we're paid or not paid, to work with children and young people to find out and share and help motivate and tap into their high aspirations. And then we have a good understanding of what good support looks like to support them to lead a good life. And I'm just wondering, what would it take for us as adults in the lives of children to change that from 9-year-old? Angela shared from the age of 9, kids just lose the fantasy, oh, I'm going to get real. Suppose I'll work in Tezza's or work in Mackie D's or I'm never going to get a job. What would it take to hold on to those high aspirations about someone's ideal future all the way through childhood and really using those to focus on what they want to do and be? So here we go. The code of practice states, and as you know, because you're kind of experts in this stuff, I appreciate that, but the code of practice states that plans must focus on preparing for adulthood from year 9 at the latest. And when we read the word must, it's the law. Just like, you know, it's illegal to drink and drive, it's illegal in theory then not to have a preparing for adulthood focused annual review from the age of year 9. So we must do it. So the discussions must, again, the law, be centered on the child or the young person. Absolutely. And the young person's aspirations and what they want to achieve must be explored as well. Really, really important. And then, of course, any revision to the education, health and care plan must include outcomes that are ambitious, stretching, and will prepare the young person for adulthood. So we're not just thinking about the 4 areas of need here. So, you know, understanding need is really important. But you know what? If I could, I would click my fingers and say, let's make it, let's just imagine we create a 5th need. And the 5th need is a need for a good life, or a gloriously ordinary life, as a friend Tricia Nicole would say. Yeah, what might that look like? Yeah, we're suddenly going to look into how do we support a good life to be achieved now and in the future. That'd be pretty cool. And then outcomes should be ambitious and show how they're going to be able to enable the young person to make progress towards their aspirations. We're going to explore a tool to do this in a moment. And then, of course, it's about ensuring people have got the right support at the right time. And we know, and they know, how they're actively engaged in decision-making. Yeah, nothing about me without me. There's some great tools out there called the decision-making profile on the website, and we'll be sure to share links to that sets out what important decisions I've got coming up in my life, how to present information to me, how to support me to make a decision. Who else might be able to help me? And what's my role and other people's roles in having the final say? So who has the final say? Just imagine if we had that level of kind of intelligence about all the children, young people we work with. What are the big decisions? It might be like, hey, which school I go to. That might be a big decision coming up next. It might be about having a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or whether I'm going to choose to leave home when I'm an adult. All these big decisions. And it could be what sounds like a really big decision for a child or young person that we might not realize is such a big decision. You know, it could be about, am I going to be willing to, you know, use that toilet pass that we heard about earlier and ask my supporter to wait outside? So I'm going to build my own independence. So there's lots of things we can do there. So I work with a good friend and colleague called John Ralphs, and he's just got this amazing talent at remembering quotes. And I can't remember him like he can, so I have to put pictures up. So it's just to kind of say, I recognize your roles and your jobs you do are really difficult, really challenging, really motivating, and you've got multiple pressures coming from your all different angles. And I don't want you to think, oh, here comes this chap Barry saying, and now we've got to do all this additional stuff. Because it's not about this, not about that. These are tools to support you to do the work you're already doing. And it's also thinking about, hey, maybe it's time to try another way. Maybe it's trying to think slightly differently. And rather than think about the world, maybe what if that were the children and young people's good lives in the school or setting you're working with? So maybe it's time to think differently. So I'm going to invite you to tap into your own imagination. I'm going to invite you to grab, if you've got one, a blank bit of paper. I haven't got one, so I'll just do that. You can pretend it's blank. So find a blank bit of paper, and I'm going to guide you through a What Matters Island. And there's something else about person-centered planning, which is before we do it with a child or young person, or indeed an adult, it's good to experience it ourselves. So we get to experience, understand, what is it like being asked these types of questions? Is it embarrassing? Do I feel guilty? Do I experience shame? Do I not want to share this type of information to someone else? So we can then begin to think about how we build trust when we work with children and young people. But before I go into that, I want to briefly share this with you, which is during lockdown, I watched all the Marvel films with my daughter every Saturday night for a long amount of time. And we started at the beginning and finished at the end. And Marvel then created this amazing program called What If? What if? I think some of the most powerful 2 words in the English language. And any Marvel fans out there might have heard someone called Captain America. And Marvel said, hey, what if it wasn't Captain America? What if it was Captain Penny Carter, the British secret agent service, secret agent? What if she was Captain Carter, Captain UK? What might she achieve? What might she do differently? So I love that idea. I'm wondering if anyone's seen this person. This person's called Thomas Bourgeois. He's got in excess of 12 million likes on TikTok. He's just been signed by a global talent agency, allegedly for a six-figure sum, and he's now working with Gucci on some of their stuff around their brand. Now, what if all of our children, young people, regardless of what label they've got attached to them, felt free to express their passion? And then what if we all found out what that passion was, and we started from that place of the passion and led out from there towards a good life? So I'm just going to share this with you. And maybe, Angela, you could give me a discreet thumbs up if you can hear it when it comes on. That would be helpful. So, and the other thing we'll do is we'll do this while the computer whirs, and there you go. Here we go. Okay, so it's a few moments. Let's just take a look at this.
Any minute now, we're going to see a class 59 come through with some absolutely brilliant honks. I cannot wait. Thanks, Gordon. Thank you, Gordon. Thanks, Gordon. After a long day train spotting in the sun, this is exactly what I needed. Oh my God! Thanks. We woken up at the crack of dawn to see the Midland Pullman HST. Boy, am I ready to see it. Come on, honk for me, please. Whoa. Come on. Fred Gordon said he's about to give me 50 tones. I've already got that 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31. Thanks, Gordon. Thanks, Gordon. One of the things that I loved most about my tram ride with the Seaton Tramway was waving at everyone. This one had a funny horn.
Yeah, what if we found out what excites and motivates people and what their passions are, and young people were free to express them? What that might look like. Absolutely, really kind of just mind-blowing. So, and if we found that out, what might we achieve together? So following this what if question, I've got another one I'd like to propose to you. What if we recognize the valuable work we do through person-centered planning and understanding what matters to a child? What if we recognize that's one way which we uphold their human rights? That's pretty mind-blowing, right? So let's share some briefly, because I think this is really, really important. Article 12, respect the views of children. Every child has the right to express their views, feelings, and wishes in all matters affecting them, and to have their views considered and taken seriously. Wow, sounds like an SEN support review, doesn't it? Or an SEN assessment, or a education, health and care plan annual review, whatever it might be. Freedom of expression. Every child must be free to express their thoughts and opinions and to access all kinds of information. Again, if someone's needing some support that's additional to and different from the universal offer, wouldn't it be good that, we understand we're supporting someone's human rights to be upheld? Specifically for children with a disability. A child with a disability has the right to live a full and decent life with dignity. I mean, I don't need to continue to read because I'm sure you've already got there to the end. Again, you're thinking about all the work that you're doing on a day-to-day activity around SEN support and education, health and care plans. Again, this is what we're trying to achieve. And thinking back to what a gloriously ordinary life looks like from when we were here together a few weeks ago, it's about having friends, relationships, mates and dates, having a good job, having money, taking part in the wider kind of cultural and artistic activities in the local area. It's about having a good life. So rather than just focusing on what's the matter, let's focus on what matters. I invite you to be, that's where we start. Because the risk is if we don't, and we only say, hey, what's the matter? What's wrong? The risk is we become experts in identifying needs and experts in identifying what we individually can do to meet that need. But we've maybe missed the trick to recognize that actually it's in the context of what a great life looks like for that child or that young person. And what if we supported their needs to be met in a way that enables them to lead a good life, have friends, be out and about in the local community, get a good job, live as independently as possible as they can, that kind of stuff. So to support us, here's the piece of paper I talked about earlier. I invite you to grab a bit of paper. And literally, I'm going to do a whistle-stop tour with you, so you'll have a very brief What Matters Island at the end. Just to say, I wouldn't go at this pace working with children, young people, just to make that really clear. I wouldn't go at this pace. Okay, so the first thing to do is pop your name on and the date on it, because it's yours, right? And you might want to review it at some point in the future. Then I want us to imagine that we're going to What Matters Island. So we're going to this lovely place where there's no one there, there's nothing to have, and there's nothing to do on this island. Maybe one or two of you are going, oh, that sounds lovely. When can I leave? Maybe some of you, oh, I don't like the sound of that. It sounds pretty boring. But because it's just imaginary, we get to choose who the people are that we're going to see on our What Matters Island. So if you've got that bit of pen and paper, you just maybe make a few notes. It might be loved ones, family members, community members. Yeah, it might be an optician. It might be, I don't know, an asthma nurse that you want to see once a year. It could be anyone, couldn't it? And don't worry, if you put them on on the island, it doesn't mean you're necessarily seeing them every day. You might be seeing some of those people every day, some of them once a year, So who are the people in your life that matter? Once we've done that, we then say, hey, what are the things that are in your life that really matter to you? So for me, I've already talked about now my asthma nurse. I'd also be wanting to take my asthma inhaler. That really matters to me because it helps make sure I'm healthy and safe. That really matters. But I'd also probably want to be taking maybe my surfboard and my swimming goggles and other things as well. So write down what are the things that really matter to you, that bring you joy in your life, and they're uniquely yours. They're uniquely yours. And then once you've done that, you then can think about what are the things that you're going to be doing on the island that you love doing, So for me, I'd be swimming, I'd be surfing, spending time with the family. I might even be having the odd afternoon nap, actually. I reckon I could get down with an afternoon nap. And you can also put on there things that you don't currently do, like afternoon naps, that you might like to do, because we're just imagining. So if there's any things you've always wanted to do that you'd like to, so you pop that down there. Now we've got a sense of what really matters to you, and it's going to be literally 1 or 2 bullet points at this pace. We then think about, what are you good at? What are you good at? Now, I want you to answer this question. I would love it if this was more interactive, but just answer this yourself. When I said, what are you good at? Did you look at that bit of paper in front of you and say, hey, Barry, that's just not good. That's not big enough. It's not big enough. There's not enough space on there to write all the different skills and attributes that I can offer this world. It's not big enough. I wonder how many people are thinking that. I'm wondering how many people are thinking, I can only think of one thing, maybe none, I don't know. So here we go. Here's a few tips. Here's a few tips for you. We can think about the 3 H's. What are you good at with your head? Right, so that might be problem solving, it might be speaking different languages, it might be maths, it could be coding, it could be, what else could it be? Solving problems, using your brain, things to do with your head, right? Once you thought about a couple of things that you're good with your head, you could think about, hey, what are you good at with your hands? The other H, your hands. So that might be you're good at practical things. You might be the best baker in the Northwest. You might be able to, I don't know, make amazing crocheted items, crocheting or knitting or massaging maybe. You might be an amazing masseuse. That might be a gift of yours. Yeah, so what are you good at with your hands? And then the third and final H is your heart. What are you good at the heart? Are you an amazing, are you really caring and considerate? Yeah, are you caring and considerate? Are you a good friend? Are you a good boss? Are you a good peer? What are you good at with your head, your hands, and your heart? Now, here's the other thing. Some of us aren't that good at admitting all the things that we're good at. I don't know. Some of us, when I ask these questions out loud, often lots of people look down in a big room. Very few people say, hey, that space isn't big enough, Barry. I'm going to need more room. What I'd like to share there is, hey, we're part of the adults in the lives of children and young people with additional needs. And my goodness, don't we need to be able to honor and kind of celebrate the things that we bring, our gifts and our own talents that we turn up with to support people to lead good lives. Here's another thing. If you felt a little bit uncomfortable about identifying just by yourself, writing down what you're good at, just take notice of it and imagine what that must be like for a child or young person that you might not have met that many times before. All of a sudden, quick, can you tell me what you're good at? So how do we create a space that there's safety and trust? Another way of doing this at this point would be, I'm going to get my mouse if I can, here it is. Look back at your first person on your list and just imagine when I click my finger, they quietly whisper in my ear, hey, this is what they're really good at. What would they say to Barry that you're really good at with your head, your heart and your hands? And then you could go down your second person on your list and your third person on your list. And if you've got a pet, because, hey, a pet's a person, right? Don't know about you, but if you've got pets, they're a member of the family. You can take them along to the island. If you've got a pet, you could imagine, what if that your pet, your goldfish, your cat, your guinea pig, your dog, your chickens, whatever your pet might be, what if they could whisper in my ear? What if I spoke goldfish? Like, what would your goldfish tell me that you're just really, really good at? Hey, well, yeah, Barry's really good at remembering to feed me every day at 5 o'clock. And you know what? Every Saturday morning at 10:10, he always cleans my filter out and makes sure I'm in a clean environment, So we're beginning to understand what you're good at from all of the people's perspectives. And then when we've done that, we can then think about what do people like about me? We used to put up there, what do people love about me? And I'm a little bit sad we don't still talk about that. But feedback from children and young people, especially as they become older, was like, no, it's not about love, it's about like. So we've respected some wishes and we've left it as what people like about me. So again, maybe write down what people like about you. The other thing you could choose to do, again, if you're struggling, is you could get your mobile phone out. You could access some messaging app. It could be, I'd be text because I'm old school, but you might be WhatsApp or Signal or Snapchat or whatever, and send a text to 3 people you trust. You could do this now if you want to, and say, hey, what 3 words sum me up? What 3 words sum me up? What do you like about me? And you'd be amazed at the lovely stuff that comes back. So again, we could do that with children and young people. And we could go back and ask the people on here, what would your dog tell me you're good at? Or they like about you? What would your mom, your sister, your next door neighbor, your best friend, what would they like about you? Okay. Then once we've done that, we would go over to if I could, I would. In the days before satellite navigation and apps like those 3 words where you can type in and find a 3-meter square anywhere on the planet through satellite navigation, we used to be able to navigate our way home through the North Star in the sky. And we use the idea of the North Star as our aspirations, our hopes, our dreams. There's our kind of North Star. Again, young people, we developed this tool. We said aspirations don't really get that. Dreams, well, there's something I have when I'm asleep, Barry. So I don't know what you're talking about. I don't understand that. And then they said, however, my best life ever, I know what you're getting at there. So the way we can invite people to think about their best life ever is answering or finishing this following sentence. If I could, I would. What's your best life ever look like? Maybe write it down on your What Matters Island in front of you. Finish the sentence. If I could, I would. Yeah, it might be, hey, if I could, I would pay my mortgage off in the next 2 years. It might be that. It might be, if I could, I would travel the world. It could be anything, and it doesn't matter. It's uniquely and beautifully yours. Here's some of mine. If I could, I would swim from England to France. Oh, I'd love to be able to swim the English Channel. One day I'm going to have a go. Here's another one. If I could, I would surf one of the biggest waves in the world. I'm far too scared. That's not me, by the way. That's not me. But hey, if I could, I would. I'd love to surf that wave in Portugal that is about 100 meters high. I'd love to do that. The other thing I'd love to do wholeheartedly is, like, if I could, I would spread nonviolence and peace and compassion across the world. That's another, I just love that. I would love that wars were a thing of the past. And I'd love there to be more peace, kindness and compassion in this beautiful place we call home. I'd really, really enjoy that. So there's some of my if I could, I would. And then what we do when we talk about aspiration, we never say, hey, that's too big, it's too big, get real. You've got to be realistic. We don't talk about that because there are dreams, there are aspirations. But what we can do is we can ask ourselves the question, we can test them. Is my aspiration positive and possible? Right? Is it positive and possible that I could swim from England to France? Well, it's positive because it's going to help my asthma. I'm going to have to train. I'm going to be fit. Is it possible? Well, yeah, a couple of hundred people do it each year. There's safety boats are set up, so it's doable. Great. That could go into one of my outcomes if I wanted it to. Yeah. So next, young people said, hey, outcomes. I don't get that, Barry. I don't get outcomes, but I understand what I want in the future. So next is the outcomes box, what I want in the future. And the way we do this is you take your aspiration. Is it positive and possible? And if the answer is yes, we can now work on that as an outcome. And the outcome, there's a great tool called the outcome sandwich. And I know I'm going through this at pace. And we will share the slides with you afterwards so you can maybe pause and reflect and take another look at it. But this is the model. I love it. So let's think about, for example, that one of me saying, hey, if I could, I would help spread compassion and non-violence. Yeah, if I could, I would. Is it positive and possible? I'm going to say, yes, it is. So this is how we could use this model. I'm going to go through it first and then give you that example. So it's in 3 layers. By a certain point in the time, what will a young person be able to do? And this is the measurable skill that they'll develop as a result of the provision that's put in. And what's that going to give the young person, make possible for them? And what will it help them do? Okay. And that relates to what's important to them now and in the future about moving towards adulthood. Okay. So let's give that example. If I could, I would help spread non-violence and compassion across the world. Is it positive and possible? I say yes. So by 2025, Barry will be able to speak fluently in non-violent communication and be skilled in de-escalation techniques. Yeah, so that he can work to support conflict resolution. There you go. There's a kind of outcome, right? Here's a thing. If we get the outcome almost there, when we send it in, when we get to the point of an education, health and care plan, the amazing plan writers will polish it. They'll tweak it. They'll tighten it up. Yeah. So you might have a look at your What Matters Island. Is it positive and possible, and work through that? So another one might be, hey, by the end of the summer term, I'm going to be able to travel on the bus into town to see my mates. That's a pretty smart outcome for PFA. Yeah. That's a pretty smart outcome. Yeah. Okay, so then you pop that in what I want in the future. And then when you've got that, we then jump down to say, hey, what needs to happen? So that used to say, who's going to do what by when? And young people are like, don't get it. What you mean, Barry, is what needs to happen. Yes, it does. Because we're taking a what matters approach and not what's the matter, we start with the child and young person. So we get them to look back at their amazing kind of one-page plan here and then say, hey, looking at this, what can you do to move towards your aspiration, to your outcome? What can you do? And we'd write that down. And then we'd say to the family members, community members, what can you do to support your child or young person move towards their outcome? Sure, that's not going to make its way into various different legislative plans, and that's okay. It's important we know it. And then finally, what support and help might you need from others? And this is where schools and colleges and early years settings would come in. What can you do to support these aspirations? So here's a little golden thread. I know this is talking about an education, health and care plan, but I think it's kind of important because it cuts across both. For those of you on the call that really enjoy the code of practice, you'll probably recognize section A is all of that stuff. Section E is that stuff, and section F is that stuff. And here they go, look, the magic golden thread. When I did this, I was so happy with myself, but now I look at it, I think it looks a bit naff, but there you go. Here's the golden thread running through. And if you had that information on a page and you needed to move from SEN support into an education, health and care plan assessment, you've got rich information ready to go. How exciting is that? So briefly, here's another example we'll share with you. We worked in Stockton-on-Tees, and Stockton said, We love the What Matters Island. They've embedded it in throughout their processes, all their funding applications, their education, health and care plans, their new requests, statutory assessments. It's embedded throughout. The parent and carer said, it's that great, we want our own version. So this is the same as before, but not just got what this means for the child, but also what it means for the family. So what we want for our child and young person next year, in 5 years, in 10 years, what can we do to support that? What can the family do? And what help might we need? Yep, there's some really, really helpful tools out there. On the Preparing for Adulthood website, which we'll share you a link to, there's some videos that you literally know, 60 seconds to 3 or 4 minutes, and you can play each one, and then you could have a chat about it as a family, as a class, as a one-to-one basis, and you could complete that part of the What Matters Island and build up over a period of time if you'd like to. So my invitation to you really would be, think about, okay, well, what next? What are your next steps? Is this something you like the look at that you might want to use? So maybe thinking about, yeah, you know what, I'm going to commit to taking a look at those links when they come through, and I'm going to practice them. I'm going to practice them with someone at work. And my last invitation to you is to say, yeah, absolutely. Sometimes the level of change and aspiration we've got in terms of radically improving the quality of lives of children with additional needs, so they live great lives now and in the future, can seem just really, really big. It can seem really big. And I love Margaret Mead's work, and I think she doesn't get quoted enough. So let's never underestimate that actually it takes small groups of committed individuals to change the world. So I think that's probably me. That's probably me.
Thanks, Barry. Sorry, I'm struggling to come off mute. Thank you so much for that. That was really helpful. I've done What Matters Island before with a group of local authority staff, and I think it is really, really important to understand that, you know, people can get very locked into the problem solving and the, as you say, the medical model of what's wrong and how do we fix things. And it certainly fits into, you know, our understanding collectively across Lancashire and West Yorkshire for Whole School Send, that, you know, young people with disabilities don't want to feel different. They want to have the same experiences as everybody else. So thank you for reminding us of that and taking us through. My island's wonderful. You know, but I found that as you were suggesting things, I was thinking, oh, I need to add that. So I'd put afternoon nap down as well. Or just getting to bed before midnight, I think, would possibly be a positive thing. So I completely understand sort of, you know, where we're going with this. And I do hope people have found that useful. There are so many sort of resources out there that are so useful that NTDI have produced, but also, you know, the PFA website has actually got those things on, and that partnership work. You know, and I would really commend that you do use them with young people, because I think the way we ask questions of young people really influences the answers we get. And, you know, as Helen was saying, just structuring that conversation and the way you put it, Barry, just helps people to understand how you get into those things. And, you know, I think often people wrestle with, how do you come up with outcomes? And sometimes local authorities, you know, aren't fast enough in their responses to annual reviews and sort of feedback, and schools are left trying to come up with the next outcome for young people. And hopefully this will give us a way of you know, reaching into the child and finding out what they really want and giving them that. So thank you. It's really helpful. If I could just ask Anne-Marie to just put the main slides back up, because I think there's just one more slide for us to share. Thank you. So I think next slide. Lovely. So we would like to give you a little bit of homework to do between this session and the next one. So our second gap task is for you to have a think about your targeted PFA offer. So we already articulated our universal offer, our the last session, and although I couldn't persuade anyone to share theirs in the chat, I hope people did have a go at doing that. And so now we're asking you to build on that, and it is very much, as Nicole was saying, building on what you're already doing for your universal offer to develop a targeted offer that works for your children. And you know, it could look different, the targeted offer, each year, because the children are different and they need something different. So we don't want to be restrictive about what the targeted PFA offer should look like. It should just meet the needs of the real children you have in your real settings. And we're also recommending this time that you maybe download a copy of the PFA Leadership Reflection Tool. And this is a resource which actually Barry contributed. I think he is actually the author of this resource, I noticed, as I put it up on the slide. So I said I did feel a bit bad about discussing it because, you know, when you're talking about something, when you've got the person who wrote it there, it could be a bit awkward. But Barry has shared with us that this was written on the back of a National Action Learning set. And we think that it's actually really supportive for leaders to actually sort of use this to ask questions about themselves and about their leadership impact. So, you know, sort of if you would like to sort of have a look at that document and look at how you might use it in your setting, we would absolutely advocate that as well. So our next session, which I think Anne-Marie has just contributed into the chat, the session is coming up on the I can't actually see the chat at the moment. Nicole, could you just share when the next session is?
Give me a second though, it doesn't actually say that in the chat, but I'll get it for you.
We just confirm the date of the next session. That will be session 3, when we will move into the targeted offer. And I do know that
17th of March.
17th of March. 17th of March, and we've had a couple of requests from people to sort of look at the targeted offer, particularly around complex needs. So we're hoping to share complex and profound needs and sort of look at what we might be offering as our specialist offer around those. We've also got some specialist input from Project Search in Blackpool, who are going to share the work that they're doing getting young people into employment. And so, you know, that's hopefully a really useful session for people. So thank you so much for giving up your time this evening and joining us. We do hope you found the session useful, and you know, please let us know if there's anything you'd particularly like us to cover in the next session.